Okay, so welcome. We're going to go through and build out a couple of practical examples here in my CloudBolt instance. I had a customer recently ask, we have some PowerShell scripts inside of our environment. How can we maybe make those reshareable inside of CloudBolt, or maybe even build catalog items that are dependent on PowerShell scripts? This is going to be really just fly by the seat of my pants. I will be making this up as we go, so I might make mistakes, but you'll get an opportunity to see how I'm approaching troubleshooting of these things, which I think is really valuable when you're working with a new system, just understanding the troubleshooting process, figuring out how these things work, and just getting a chance to see how these work from the ground up. So I'm going to do two different use cases here. The first use case is going to be a catalog item. So actually get a blueprint inside of the CloudBolt catalog that's backed by a PowerShell script. The second item is going to be, I already have something put together similar to this already for a server action. We may just create a new one just to show what that process looks like from the ground up. But I'll show one of the server actions I have with PowerShell is literally just add user to the local admins group, which could be useful, right? Maybe if you're not leveraging Active Directory for group membership on servers, you could use that to add it to the local user admins. I think Active Directory is probably going to be a lot more prevalent. So maybe in a production environment, that's actually a call out to Active Directory with a service account that has permissions to actually add a user to the group that has admin permissions for that computer. So anyway, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. Like I'd mentioned, the first thing we're going to cover is effectively creating a PowerShell script that can be called directly from the CloudBolt catalog. This could be an existing script that with minimal changes could be leveraged directly inside of CloudBolt. We'll talk really, the changes that I'm referencing here really center and revolve around inputs and what you're attempting to pass into each of those scripts. So this would be similar to like creating a PS1 file and then calling it from the command line, but not quite exactly the same. And I think as we go through this, it will start to become more clear. So the first thing I'm going to do is to create a blueprint. Let's call this PowerShell catalog items, descriptive enough. We can give it a meaningful icon. I should have a Windows icon in here somewhere. Icon, scroll down, W, just help keep the catalog looking nice and relevant. I'm going to go with the newer Windows logo. So there's our Windows icon. Sequence, I'm going to say 0. Resource type, I'm actually going to set this to be none. And the reason that I'm doing that is if you've worked with CloudBolt before, you'll know that when a blueprint has a resource type assigned to it, effectively what we're saying is this blueprint is creating something inside of my environment. That something needs to have its lifecycle managed. We need to be able to tear it down or run day 2 actions against that thing that script built, which we can do with PowerShell scripts. I think that subject is just a bit beyond what I'm trying to cover here. This is just real quick. We have management scripts that we need to run in our environment. We need to make sure they're role-based access controlled. Those kinds of things, but we're not really creating new things for the environment that then need to be managed in the catalog. So for an administrative level catalog item, I'm almost always going to do none, which means that this is really just an ad hoc job. We're going to call from the catalog. It will take an action, and then it's done. Somebody can come back and run the same job over again an hour or 2 later, and maybe it's taking the same action based on the parameters we pass in. Maybe it's against a different resource or something along those lines. So anyway, PowerShell catalog item, resource type of none. I don't need a resource name template because I'm not creating a resource because this is set to none. So something important to note there, if none, you don't create a resource as an output of this blueprint. I'm going to go ahead and save here. Once this catalog item is up, I can, so that idea of role-based access controlled scripts, I don't want to assign this because this is probably going to be an administrative catalog item. I don't want to assign it to all of my groups. So where I might do any group can deploy for a lot of my other blueprints to make it more of a consumption-based model, I'm going to say for deploy or even manage and deploy, let's maybe just say that my admins group is the only group that has access to this catalog item. So before we've even built the script and included it as part of this catalog item, we've already constrained who has access to deploy this blueprint. So just really quick up front, that was easy to do. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add an action to our build tab. And the type of action we're going to do is not going to be a CloudBolt plugin. A CloudBolt plugin is a Python module that runs on the CloudBolt server locally. We're actually going to use a remote script. And a remote script, we'll get a little further down the road with this here in a minute, but we're going to create a new script, and I'm just going to call it something like PowerShell. I may just write host, or actually I think write console might be better for what we're trying to do, but maybe it's PowerShell, hello world, something along those lines, just to see that it actually does function. But it's going to be something along the lines, we're going to take in some inputs, we're going to print this out, and that way we should be able to see that as part of the job logs when we go through this. I can make it shared, so sharing this build item would allow me to go into another blueprint and then call this PowerShell hello world script from as part of another blueprint, which could be useful depending on the use case. I'm not going to share it here. We can set an execution timeout for hello world. 3,600 seconds is way too long. So I'm actually going to trim this down to maybe just 100 seconds. I don't want to let it go for super long. Max retries allows you to define the number of times you want to retry the script if it does fail, which is really helpful if you have a system in your environment that's notoriously, it just doesn't, it's intermittent communication sometimes. This can help in that instance. And then run on server. And this is really where this starts to become, this is where we need to pay attention here. So I have a server inside of my environment that's already a predetermined PowerShell host. One of the things I will point out with a PowerShell script, CloudBolt does not come installed with PowerShell on the operating system. While you could probably install PowerShell for Linux on the CloudBolt operating system and then call it directly from CloudBolt, I don't think I would recommend it, just because most of the modules that I think our customers are leveraging in PowerShell are going to be management oriented, meaning that it's something like the Active Directory users and computers plugin for PowerShell. You're trying to do some kind of environment maintenance with a PowerShell module that really only works for Windows the last time I checked. So I usually will go through with PowerShell. I typically have a PowerShell host set up somewhere in the environment. In this case, I just wanted to check and recall what it was called. OS, there we go, MB PowerShell 01. So that's self-explanatory enough, right? So I'm going to set this script, and I'm going to say that this always runs on MB PowerShell 01. What I've done by this is I've set up my PowerShell host for this script. This is where it's always going to run. So makes it really easy. That way we know that this script is always going to execute from this server. As we get into server actions here in just a little bit, server actions typically run in the context of the server that we're executing against, but not always, and we'll unpack a little bit of that. If you have to pass any additional command lines, because what we will do with the scripts that we're creating is we will create a PS1 file on the guest. That PS1 file is a Django template that will take in your input parameters, template out that script so that we can reuse it in different contexts. And then as we go to write that script to the guest, we'll fill in the templated details, we'll pass it to the guest, and then we'll actually run a command that goes through and executes that PowerShell file. So you can pass an additional command line args that you want to be used when you're calling that PS1 file that we're writing. One of the other things that I will call out, this PowerShell host, if user account control is enabled on there, that can cause headaches, because user account control's job is to block administrative level functions on a Windows server. So just be mindful of that. If you're running issues where you can't do something and UAC's on, log into the guest, try and do the same thing inside of the guest without clicking like, yes, this is an admin function, or elevating your PowerShell command prompt. That'll tell you whether UAC is blocking it or not. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do, just leave this as enter code later. And remove after run, this is handy. This says on the guest. After we create the script on the MB PowerShell 01, we want to remove that script when we're done running. So we don't want to leave these artifacts out there on the guest. We want to clean them up. You can disable that for debugging. Oh, sorry, OS families. The other thing I'm going to do here is I am going to, it's going to be a PowerShell script. So it's just going to be Windows. I'm just going to set Windows here. And no, PowerShell Hello World's already in use. So let's just call it Hello World again. Apparently I've already done that example in this instance. Let's go ahead and save our build action. Now what we have is a build action on our canvas here. It's really, there's nothing in here yet, but what we're going to do here is just build out a really quick, super basic script. I'm going to do write host, and I don't recall if this works with offhand. I don't recall which way this works. So we're actually going to set a couple of variables. Var1 equals, and then var2 equals. And hopefully I'm remembering my syntax for PowerShell as far as setting variables. But what we're going to do then is actually give this a templated input. Maybe we call the first one your name. And the second one your favorite color. Now what we're doing here is, again, setting two variables. They're just very basic strings. The first one is I'm going to prompt the user to pass in their name. The second one, I want them to pass in their favorite color. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to write those variables. The first write host, I'm going to do just hello world. And this is really ugly PowerShell. I don't remember if it's a plus, so I'm just going to do this on a separate line. Again, this is really ugly PowerShell. I know that there's some string concatenation here that I'm really messing up, but please don't judge me on that. var1 and my okay, so I believe we'll capture this output from this, and let's go ahead and save this now. So you see the examples, all of the things we set up here show here. The other thing I will point out while we're here, execution filters are really handy if we're doing this as like a server action. So this remote script, I may actually use this as my example for a server action as well, and we'll build on that in just a second. But these execution filters for remote scripts, maybe I only want to allow this to be called for like VMware resource handlers. So this would say, if I'm doing this in the context of a VMware resource handler, then I want it to be available, but not for AWS or Azure or any of the other clouds that we work with. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of that though. Now that I've set up my script, I'm going to save code. And what you'll notice here is dynamically, we're actually looking at these double curly brackets. Again, like I mentioned, we're using a Django template, that's what this script is. It's a template. And this template, CloudBolt parses this template to find anything in double curly brackets, and it's going to create inputs that match those. So your name, your favorite color are both here, and maybe I want to change the order here so I can drag your name up to be first. I can also put some constraints around your name. Like maybe I want maximum length to be 25 characters long. If your name's longer than 25 characters, I don't want you to input it. But I also want to say that it needs to be at least 3 characters long. So just a little bit of string logic here that's helpful. You can also change the type here, like if you're prompting the user for a password, you can mask that value. We would still inject it into this template at the time of execution, and it would still run from the guest with those secreted values passed into it. So really handy. We can also put descriptions, which would show a tooltips and things along those lines, or regex constraints if you're looking for like an IP address, something like that. Actually, we have an IP address type, which makes that, it's not showing here. But you could do a regex constraint check for an IP address or a valid DNS name, things like that. So a lot of additional capability added here. Your favorite color. Now, for your favorite color, I'm going to do this a little bit different. I'm actually going to put some options in here. So quit making a drop down. We selected your favorite color, the parameter here. Now I'm going to go to this static options field. We can also use a CloudBolt plugin with Python to dynamically generate options, but I'm just going to make this real simple. I'm going to say I want to allow the user to select from blue, red, yellow, green, Nope, not een. Bear with me. Let's try this again. Red, green. I think that's enough options for now, but we're going to go ahead and save this. And you'll see now that there are 4 options available for this parameter. I think. Let's go back over to our action, our remote script. So now we have this configured in a way that it should show decently inside of the catalog. It's going to run on our PowerShell 01 host. And I really think the last thing I need to do here is just submit this and see that this runs. But I'm going to go back to my blueprint, go to the overview tab, select order. And in our catalog item, notice the admins group is the only group allowed here because that role-based access control is in place. And we have a drop-down list of blue, green, red, or yellow. I'm going to select blue. I'm going to put in my name as Mike. From here, I'm going to submit this request and hope that it works because I haven't checked the plumbing here or anything. This is just taking an existing Windows server, hoping that it's set up correctly to validate that things are working. I'm actually going to step into this job that's executing here and just keep an eye on things here. Okay, so it completed with a status of success. So that's really handy, but I don't see the output from the script. And I think I know what the problem is there. And I was kind of on the fence there. I didn't know if write host would come back. I think what we're capturing is the standard out, which actually requires a write console. So I'm going back to my blueprint. It did run on the guest, but we're not seeing any of that output from the guest. So this is really handy to see as well, because if you are trying to log in your PowerShell scripts to do debugging and things along those lines, you'll probably want to use the write console to get that input passed back to you. So let's see, write console. Actually, just copy console, paste. And that should show all 5 lines of output from this. It will capture errors and things along those lines. So if you've constructed your script to handle errors, and I think also if you're returning like an error, like if you return an error code, we will also fail the job if it's like a 1 but a 0 return is something that's accepted as a successful run. Okay, that's saved now. Go back over to my catalog item. Let's go ahead and kick this order off again. And your name, Mike, favorite color, I'm going to change it to red this time. I'm going to submit. Let's keep an eye on our job again. It's reaching out to my MB PowerShell 01 server. And in a second here, all right, so it didn't like that at all. So write console is not the correct command. Oh, it's write output. So again, that's my fault. I'm going to go back there. I'm going to pause the video for a second. No reason for anybody to sit through that. Update those real quick, and we'll be right back before we execute again. Okay, just to save you a couple of seconds, here we go. We have our write output now updated instead of write console. And now that we've included our output, we're going to go ahead and order this one last time. I'm going to change my favorite color to maybe yellow. Let's go ahead and submit. Okay, and I paused for a second just to spare you again the 14 seconds it took to run that. Now we are back over to our job. And notice we have a show details here. So anything that's write output will show up here. And you can see that we ran that script on that MB PowerShell 01 host. And here's the console output. So we can see those inputs are functioning. They're getting passed into the script. Hopefully that's helpful to see that in the context of a catalog item. The other thing, though, I'm going to show just real quick, probably take another 3 or 4 minutes. We're going to look at server actions because PowerShell scripts can also be really useful in the context of a server that we're trying to execute against. So I have an existing sample here where this add user to local admins script it's a PowerShell script that I've put together. This is a really quick, really it's a 1-line script. I've put a couple of additional lines in here, but it's add local group member to the administrators group and the member is a user. I could do other things. I could have a drop-down list of saying, pick from, maybe it's remote desktop users and administrators and just computer users. and those different groups. They could select the group from a dropdown dynamically, and we could inject that in so that they can choose their group membership when they submit this request. These server actions can also be role-based access controlled. So when you define a role in CloudBolt, your server actions also show up, even custom server actions that you've written, as something that we can permission to the end user. I would use a server action versus a catalog item in the case of I need to run something against a server. And the reason that I would do that is, again, a server action, this is going to run, let's take a look at this script itself. This is going to be slightly different in that we are not running against a specific server. I could continue to run scripts on my PowerShell host all day long, but really for this example, I'm going to run this inside of the server that we're executing. And we can tell that from the servers in context here. Part of what I'm going to do here, I'm going to edit the script just a little bit. I'm going to take my write output. I'm going to just print another statement, and I'm going to say on server, oh, my string concatenation really wasn't that bad. It's just a $sign inside of your string on server. And then I'm going to do, actually, I don't even need to do that. So we reference our server object that we are executing against here with the Django template language. So any parameter value that is set on our server object that we're executing in the context of, we can pull that information in and inject it into this script at runtime. So this is going to add a user to the local administrators group. It's also going to write the output and inject that server hostname into this remote script. So I'm going to save this code just to show. So anything that's a CloudBolt parameter could be like IP address. I think it's just server.ip. And we can pull the IP address from the server. Makes it really useful for those kinds of use cases. If I go back over now to my servers, I can go in and select not my PowerShell server this time. I have a different one here. Let's do this MBSE demo 003. I'm wondering if this is even joined to the domain. You know what? I'm going to do my PowerShell server just because it is joined to the domain. I don't know about that particular server. MB PowerShell 01. Okay, we are going to run this add user to local admins. And I'm going to, my user UPN, I know that I'm already a local admin, so maybe I just add Sid. It should do the trick. The username is cached because it's the server credentials, so I don't have to input those. Now we have a job that's been launched that's going out and actually running this action against that server. We'll give this just a second. Again, it doesn't take a very long time to execute. This may not work just because editing on the fly. Scripts doesn't always work, but hey, here we go. Let's look at show details. Perfect. So you can see that it's pulling in attributes about the server that we're executing against in context. It has added that user to the local admins group. So just another practical example of how to use a PowerShell script inside of CloudBolt. There are all kinds of other contexts that we can also use PowerShell scripts in. I think these are two of the first ones that we see customers use. So hopefully this has been helpful. If you have any questions at all, please reach out. We'd be happy to showcase some more. So thanks a lot for taking time to watch.